Justice O'Connor. If you live here, that microphone will pick you up.
Right.
So I don't have to tell everyone here what a tremendous honor and opportunity it is to have Justice Sandra O'Connor with us today. Certainly, if ever there was anyone who needed no introduction, it would be the Justice. I'm going to do it anyway.
Fair enough.
Well, she does
How long
outright.
have we known each other? When did we meet?
Justice O'Connor was nice enough to come here at the invitation of a student in 1991. Angela Bucci then, now Angela Paulus, a member of the Rhode Island bench, wrote tirelessly to Justice O'Connor about the history of this law school as a school established exclusively for women.
Mm-hmm.
And Justice O'Connor graciously came here in 1991. She was the first justice to have her portrait painted, Georgiana Nyman Aronson. And
I better go look at that.
yes, it's still there. That's never going anywhere. But she also was nice enough to come back for our 100th anniversary, where she was the keynote speaker over at Boston Garden. You can still see that on the website if you care to. I think it was a wonderful day for the law school, and obviously enhanced exponentially because Justice O'Connor was willing to be with us, as she is today. And I don't think it's a good idea for me to take all of her time. We've agreed upon a little bit of a format with everyone's indulgence. And the first thing I'd like to let you know is we're going to talk about a couple of issues that Justice O'Connor feels strongly about, and then we'll take some questions from you.
Yeah.
But I would like to welcome everyone formally and to thank you so much, Justice O'Connor. This is a rare opportunity, so thank you.
Very lucky you have an engaging dean, and so when he sets his mind to have something happen, it usually does. He manages very well, and we're fortunate.
You're very kind, Justice O'Connor. And again, trying to keep in mind that the theme here is for the students to enjoy your company. I've been fortunate enough to spend some time with Justice O'Connor. I know some of the issues that she feels strongly about, and she was a tremendous leader both before and after her term on the court. So why don't we begin by...
Oh, now there is no term on the court. Let's just get that straight.
I think you decided what your term was.
No, fortunately, on our U.S. Supreme Court, there is not a term limit, put it that way.
Well,
Which is rather nice.
And we were happy that when you decided to retire from the court, that you were determined to stay active and, as she said to me, try and continue to make a difference. And one of the areas that she is most passionate about right now is a project that she started called iCivics. Would you mind talking a little bit about that, Justice O'Connor?
Yeah, well, I will. You know, it's shocking how little most people know about our government. They can't, I think, not even 2/3 of the public can name the 3 branches of government, much less say what they do. It's just amazing how little people seem to know. If you become a new citizen of the country, you have to pass very challenging tests and answer all these questions. But those of us who are born here and are citizens automatically, apparently, we have learned a lot because the statistics are terrible. 1 in 8 can name the president. Now, whether that would be better after a recent election, it probably would. I don't know. But it's shocking how little people know. And so when I was young, I went to school in El Paso, Texas. I grew up on a remote ranch that was half in Arizona, half in New Mexico. We didn't have school anywhere. So I was sent off to El Paso to live with maternal grandparents and go to school in El Paso. And we had civics, it seemed to me, practically every year. I was sick and tired of it. I think in the long run it was probably a good idea. I probably learned there was a judicial branch and all that sort of thing. So that's good. But today's young people know so little about how our government is structured and how it works that it's frightening. And I found while I was serving on the court that judges weren't very popular. We saw all kinds of things being introduced in Congress that were just scary to try to do something terrible to judges. If there was a proposal in South Dakota called jail for judges, they were going to amend their constitution with voter approval so that they could send a state court judge to jail if the judge made a certain kind of decision. I mean, it was amazing. So I thought what that was telling me was that we ought to do more education in this country about how government works. In other words, civics classes. And I had a lot of that in El Paso. I got sick and tired of it. But maybe it was a good thing in the long run. I learned there was a judicial branch. Didn't forget that in my lifetime. But it is a great concern to me because most states have stopped teaching civics. And 2/3 of young people cannot name the 3 branches of government. I mean, that's pretty fundamental, pretty basic. And it's just really a worry. So I thought we ought to do some civics education. And I put together kind of a website with charitable contributions. We got a little from the Gates Foundation and things like that to get it started. And I had an advisory group of fabulous teachers. And my aim was middle school. Now, I don't know what you think about middle school, but by the time you're in middle school, your brain has grown as large as it's going to grow. I mean, it's there. And the hormones haven't totally kicked in. And they're eager to learn. They really are. They want to learn in middle school. They like it. And so I thought, there is my target. And we can teach them something about civics. And also, in middle school, they spend on an average 40 hours a week in front of some kind of screen, TV and or computer. So, that told me maybe we should have a computer program to teach them something about civics. And that if we put games on it, they like it. They like to sit there and play games on the computer. How many of you have tuned into iCivics? Anybody? Yeah, some. If you haven't, look at it because it really is fun. It's full of games that the young people play. And in the process, they learn about civics. And recently, we had a game dealing with running for president, just to make it kind of be timely on things. But it's a terrific vehicle for learning. And I think we're starting to make a difference. I have chair people in all 50 states. I had lunch today with the woman who's chair of iCivics for this state. And you can help spread the word. If you know anybody in middle school, work on it. Tell them they have to use iCivics. And you look at it, it's called Little iCivics. You know, we have iPads and iPods and everything. So I thought iCivics made sense. And that's what it is.
And Justice Cordy is a faculty member here, so people are familiar with him. We had a little history lesson at lunch from Justice O'Connor about why all public schools, in fact, were founded.
Well, that's right. You know, got a constitution drafted and adopted in this country in the early days, and we got some states starting to approve it and so forth. And about 30 years after we adopted our constitution, there was a movement in the country among those states that had formed as states to try to teach civics, to teach young people what was in the Constitution and what form of government we had adopted, and to do it as a school program and to develop public schools for that purpose. That is why they wanted us to have public schools. And we got public schools eventually in all 50 states and still have them. So I'm just hoping they'll remember their purpose and go back and teach civics.
Well, and I'm thinking that everyone in this room will look into the iCivics website. She was taking names before. Let me, if I may, move on to another issue that you've been prominent in addressing, and that is the independence of the judiciary. And if I can ask you to address some of your concerns there.
Well, very much so. You know, I ended up being a state court judge in my home state of Arizona. And I served on the trial court bench there, and then went on the appellate court bench in Arizona. And it was from that spot that President Reagan made the appointment of me to the Supreme Court. I don't think it was a perfect background, but anyway, that's how I got there. And I have been concerned about how we select judges. In the federal system, as you know, all federal judges are selected by the president, and they need to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. And there's no term limit for federal judges. They serve basically until the judge decides it's time to retire. And I think that's a much better system than those states that have opted instead to elect their judges. And when you elect a judge, then, and I started being a judge in Arizona on the trial court when I had to run for the position. Arizona was one of those states that required election, and that meant I had to raise money to publish a few ads in hopes that people would recognize the name and perhaps cast a vote for me. And I had to worry about it. It is a terrible way for judges to have to get chosen. The people who contributed were, in every instance, the lawyers who were most apt to appear before me. They were the ones who wanted to put money in the pot and have me remember, so that they were like doing a favor or something. But that's how the system works, and it's not good. We should have adopted the federal model, I think, in the state. And a number of states did, but a great many of our states still have popular election of judges. So that's been one of the things that I've tried to address as I've gone around the country and have an audience that might listen. And I still hope that we will make progress in getting rid of judicial elections. I don't think at the moment we're making a lot of progress there. Why, I'm not sure. Maybe you can tell me. You probably come from some of you states that elect your judges.
Anybody want to handle that? All right, so that I don't entirely dominate this, you know, I'm going to ask one more question, but I'm going to give a little bit of background first, if it's all right, Justice O'Connor. When we were having lunch, I asked Justice O'Connor about how well the O'Connor House project was doing, and I think it's something that she feels is a very worthwhile endeavor. So maybe my last question would be, you were so interesting talking about that. Would you share that with our students?
My husband and I met in law school, and then he promptly got drafted. In those days, we had the draft during the Vietnam years, and he'd been deferred, finished law school, and so then he promptly got drafted. And we were sent overseas. He was sent overseas to Frankfurt, Germany. And we hadn't been married long, and it was so hard for me to get a job when I got out of law school. You can't imagine how hard it was. I did well in law school. One of my classmates who also did well was a fellow named William Rehnquist. They were justices. And I thought, and I was on the law review and did all the things that I thought were good for law school, good grades. And I had hoped, I really thought, I just assumed that it would be difficult to get a job. And because we were getting married and we both liked to eat, and John was going to be off in the service, I really needed to have a job. And there were placement notices on the bulletin board at Stanford Law School saying, Stanford Law graduates, call us. We'd like to talk to you about prospective employment. I personally called every single number on that bulletin board, and there were at least 40 numbers up there. Not a single one of them would give me an interview. I was female. And I said, why won't you give me an interview? Because I was up there in the rankings. They said, well, we don't hire women. And I said, well, why not? Because our clients wouldn't stand for it. And that was the answer that I got. And it was just amazing. Thank heavens we're over that today. But it was just shocking. And I really didn't know what to do. And I'll tell you the story about what I did. Because I needed to, we both like to eat. One of us was going to have to earn something somehow. So I heard that the county attorney in San Mateo County, California, had once had a woman lawyer on his staff. So I wrote him and made an appointment to go see him. And like all elected officials, he was very glad to meet me. So I told him that I was looking for a job and hoped that he might find my application worthy. And he looked and said, oh yes, very, very fine record here. But he said, I get my money from the County Board of Supervisors. And I'm not funded to hire another deputy right now. I use the money they've given me to hire deputies, and I don't have any cushion left to hire somebody. Well, so that did present kind of a problem. And so I nevertheless saw him and had him walk me around the offices and show me around. And I said, well, I'll tell you what. I really would like to work for you here. It looks interesting to me. And I'll work for you for nothing until such time as the supervisors decide to give you some money. Well, what was he going to do about that? And he told me that the problem is I don't have a place to put another deputy right now. And he had walked me around the offices, and it was true. There wasn't a vacant office. And I said, well, I know you don't have a vacant office right now, but I met your secretary, and she's very nice, and there's room in her space to put a second desk if she wouldn't object. That was my first job out of law school. No pay, and I put my desk in with the secretary. But you know what? I loved my job. I got asked various legal questions from all the different agencies and divisions of county government about, can I do this legally? Can I do that? How can I do this, that, or the other thing? I loved my job and what I was doing. I really did. And so I stayed a number of months there without any pay and with my desk in with the secretary. But I did like very much what I was doing. That was my start. And it was in the public sector, which tended to be what I liked actually most of my life. So it all worked out. And then eventually, my husband got drafted because he'd been deferred for the Vietnam War from the draft. And he got drafted, and he was sent off to Charlottesville, Virginia for a school that was at the university for the lawyers. And we had been married long enough, so I gave up my treasured job and went with him back to the University of Virginia. And of course, I couldn't get a job for 3 months back there. I took tennis lessons. And one day on the weekend, it was kind of showery like this. It was a gloomy day. It was a Sunday or a Saturday, I don't remember. And I had never been to Washington, D.C. So I said, why don't we drive up to Washington, D.C. today and have a look? I'd love to see it. My husband had actually traveled there and been there and seen the city, but I never had. So we drove up and I said, now let's go look at the Supreme Court. So we drove up Capitol Hill and parked and got out and walked all around the Supreme Court. And since it was the weekend, it was locked up. We couldn't get in. And we said to each other, well, that's the closest we'll ever get to this. And I took pictures of my husband. He was in his uniform in the pillars up there on the steps of the court. And little did we know that we'd spent a lot of time right there.
Well, you were also known back in Arizona when you were the leader of the legislature as being one of the nonpartisan people who would get things done. And that led to one of the great
I guess I was partisan. I ran as a member of my political party, ran for the office and was elected. But what I quickly learned is that you have to make friends on both sides of the aisle, both parties. You have to become friendly and be interested and talk about the issues. And so I did that with the people on both sides of the aisle. And every now and then I make chalupas, that's kind of Mexican. And invite the leaders of both parties over and get some cold beer, and we'd sit around outside at our adobe house on a desert and eat chalupas and drink beer and make friends. And then it's interesting how when there came to be a real problem in the legislature, something we had to get votes for and work on, some way had to get a compromise. I could usually manage that because we had become friends and they'd be reasonable in some fashion. And I just think that's so important, and I think that's some of what we've lost today, and I'm not sure why, but I think even though you have different political parties and you're members of different parties, you nonetheless can talk about issues and agree at some point down the line on what needs to be done and get it done. So that was what I learned when I was in the legislature in Arizona. Probably a pretty good lesson.
Well, and in recognition of her contributions and her ability to get things done, her home, an adobe home out in Arizona and New Mexico, is being preserved. And maybe you can just tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, when my husband and I came back to Phoenix to live and work after he got out of the service, we wanted to build a house. We had our first child and then two more, and so we had little people. We had to do something. I had grown up on the Lazy Bee Ranch in an adobe house. It was a house where we had put plaster on the walls through the years and saved the adobes that way. It didn't have it had a flat roof and plastered. But my husband and I decided to build an adobe house, and we found we needed a place that would make adobes. I could buy burnt adobes. They're like bricks. They've been baked and roasted or like a brick. But I wanted the sun-dried adobe. And they're wonderful. They're just made out of the mud and dried in the sun, and they feel good. They're wonderful. And so we found a contractor who was willing to build with the sun-dried adobes. And we persuaded him to do that. And my husband and I mixed thin adobe mud, and we raked every joint with electrical conduit to shape it, and we painted the walls inside and out with thin adobe mud paint. And I just loved the finished product. It was fabulous. You put your hand on it. It was absolutely wonderful. So that was our house. And when I was named for the Supreme Court in 1981, we had to move to Washington, D.C., and housing in D.C. is much more expensive than in Arizona. So we had to sell our house, which was heartbreak, but we had to do that, and did. But at the end of the day, the house was sold. The owner was going to tear it down and build a big mansion for himself. And friends in Arizona said, "Oh, we can't let the O'Connor house be destroyed." And I said, "We can't move it." And they said, "No, yes." They pulled it apart, adobe by adobe, packed it on trucks, and got a lot given to them by the Tempe Historical Society in Tempe, Arizona. That's where Arizona State University is. It's adjacent to Phoenix. And the house was moved and put up there, and it's reconstructed, and it's fabulous. It just looks so good. I'm thrilled. And we're using it as a place where civil talk leads to civic action, because that's what it takes. You have to get along with people of different viewpoints and talk it out, talk about it. Maybe you won't agree on the bottom line, but if you've talked about it and everybody gets to express their views, you've got a good chance of getting some working agreement with people if you approach it that way. And that's what we're trying to do with the O'Connor House on lots of major issues, like what should we do with illegal aliens and education in Arizona. And we're trying to apply this principle and get some suggestions going that will solve some of that problem and many others as well. But it's been interesting.
A tremendous and well-deserved tribute to you. Justice O'Connor, are you willing to take a few questions from our students?
Sure. I don't promise to answer, but I
know, I saw you on the letter, but I know. So, yes, let's start right there, if you're willing.
Should I stand?
Why not? Thank you.
Seeing as my question is the first, it should go without saying, but I'm sure I'm speak on behalf of everyone in this room when I say thank you so much for sharing your time today with us. It's really an honor.
Well, let me tell you why I did. He is really terrific. Do you know how lucky you all are to have Dean O'Brien? How many years have you been Dean here now?
I won't say too long.
Guess that.
24.
24. And I've known you for many of those 24 years. And there are not many law school deans who survive. You know, they can't take it. You all are in trouble. But he has. He's been wonderful. And I'm so impressed with his goals for the law school and what he's achieved with your help and with the law school. So when he invites me to something, it's awfully hard to say no. Now, what's your question?
My name is Jeff Knight, and I'm the business managing editor for the New England Law Review, the flagship publication of New England Law Boston. Mm-hmm. And in just 2 days, on Thursday, we're having our annual symposium, this time titled Crisis in the Judiciary. Oh. It's meant to highlight the fiscal crisis that state courts all over America have been struggling with.
They are.
Your remarkable career, including your having served in all 3 branches of state government in Arizona, provides you with, to be sure, a very special perspective on this issue. My question, Justice O'Connor, is whether there are any remarks you wish to share on the current funding crisis facing state judiciaries in America.
Well, there's no one answer, and every state has its own particular financial situations, so they're not identical in terms of their resources or their system or their needs. And they don't all have the same kind of judicial system. But obviously, this is a time when money is scarce and the needs continue to grow. And as law students, you care about having enough funding to have the kind of teachers and professors that are inspiring, and you want a law school that meets your needs, and we all want to see that happen. So how are we going to do it? I don't have any easy answer, except that having served in the legislature, legislators have to make some choices, and they have to decide which programs need to be funded. And at what level of funding you really have to provide so they can survive. And I've been in the legislature. I know how hard some of those financial decisions are to make, but you have to try to help the school persuade legislators that what you're doing in this school is important and it is just vital that they give the essential amount that it takes to run the school. Obviously, you have to pay some professors. You're not going to learn much without professors. And you have to have a physical plant that's maintained in some fashion. You don't mind being a little overcrowded, tell them. But it's a tough deal right now. And I don't know how long we're going to feel this financial pressure. I don't think anybody does. We'll have to wait and see. But you can be part of trying to be persuasive with those people who have to come up with the money to help support the school. You perhaps don't get any public money here at all.
We don't, but certainly the state schools have had such pressure that many, including a lot in California, are actually charging what private schools are
I
charging,
know,
which is
which is a lot.
which is let's go over here.
Hello, my name is Parker Reynolds and I'm a first year student here. Seeing as we are 3 weeks and 2 days from our first exams.
From your first exams? Oh,
I
had any till now? Oh my goodness.
Well, they have interim ones that care of varying degrees.
All right.
I was hoping you could maybe provide me with some.
Tell you how to pass. Study hard. You really do have to study hard. It matters. And I don't know how you do it, but I read everything that I thought we had to read to do it. But then I had a group of fellow students that I thought seemed bright and competent, and we would kind of get together as well and talk to each other about what we thought the main topics of the exam would touch on and what we ought to know. And aside from that, I don't know, just work, and try to learn everything you can. Hard.
Thank you. Let's see if we have something here now.
Excuse me. Hi, my name's Eric Hagan. I'm a second year. I was just curious if you had ever read any criticisms or critiques or support for any of your decisions in publications, or did they ever have any impact on your future jurisprudence?
What's done is done. Written an opinion, authored it. Obviously, you had at least 6 votes, or you wouldn't have had a court to speak of, or 5. But yes, you read some about what people have to say about it. You read some in the press, and then you are going to see more probably in published law review articles than you do in the press. And it's always interesting to read what they have to say. And you can't please everybody, is the lesson. But don't worry, do the best you can.
In the back.
Justice Connolly, you mentioned a little earlier with the elected judges about the effects of donations when they would donate to your campaign and they come in there thinking they're going to get a favor. How do you feel about that as far as like other elected officials in the legislative and executive branches with campaign finance and its effects on
Well, I can't quite hear what you're saying. I guess you're asking about our system of campaign financing generally, and
Yes.
if you're not a judge, if you're in some other position.
Yes, correct.
Well, if you've taken money, particularly if it's a lot of money, from someone who stands to benefit greatly from your action as a public figure, that's a lot to worry about. And if you're not worried about that, you must have nerves of steel. I mean, I think that is a concern. That is the problem with election of public officials. Your concern always is if you take money, then can you act fairly and appropriately in decisions that affect somehow the business or activity of the people who've donated to you or people like them. I mean, that's what you worry about always. And you have to tell yourself, well, can I be fair? Oh, yes, I can be fair. Well, I hope that's right. But that's our system in large measure, isn't it? Because we elect many of our officials, and if you ask public opinion, they want to keep electing them. It's not that people want to give that up at all. They don't. So we have to somehow try to make it work. And it's a worry.
My name is Manmeet Kaur. I'm a second-year law student. Prior to law school, I was an educator in the public system in Texas. In your iCivics program, while it's welcomed by educators, it's not necessarily accepted by legislatures who are responsible for the curriculum. What has your committee, or what efforts have your committee made to convince the legislature that it's something that should be adopted?
Well, legislators aren't typically setting what it is the schools are teaching and how they teach it. I've found very little interest by legislators in specifics of what you're teaching. I mean, if you were teaching them not to elect public officials, they might make it. I don't think they do. So that has not been a concern of mine. But I do think it's important to have general understanding and knowledge about what's being taught and why. And if parents can see that their kids are learning and the kids are obviously enjoying how and what they're learning, that's a plus. And you hope to keep it going that way.
Yes.
Justice O'Connor, I'm Suzanne Gilliam. I'm a first-year law student. You mentioned earlier that you didn't know if your background was perhaps perfect for a Supreme Court justice. It seems from the outside like being in all three branches would be very helpful. What would you, if you could design the ideal career, what it leading to?
I'd be a fantastic writer. And I don't think I was that good. I mean, I did okay, but I think you have to write very persuasively if you're on an appellate court, because you need to persuade your colleagues and then the public about the correctness of your decision. And so good, effective, persuasive writing is key, probably.
My writing teacher will be thrilled.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Clarence Harper and I'm a second year student. Because you have been so active after your retirement, have you been able to keep up with the current cases in front of the Supreme Court now? And if so, are there any certain cases where if you had the chance you would want to jump back on just to...
If there were, I wouldn't tell you. You probably are. But I'm not going to run around making statements about decisions that my former colleagues have to make. That's up to them these days, and they don't need my advice. But of course, I have my own opinions, particularly when they're taking as a case another case to undo something that I wrote years ago. Then I do pay attention.
Hi, my name is Himani. I'm a first-year law student. I had a question about Justice Roberts has been criticized by some for voting alongside the liberal justice for the Affordable Care Act. In your opinion, do you find it difficult or possible for justices to make decisions alongside, despite political affiliations?
Well, they don't have any choice. I mean, you're there as a justice for life. And you, in that position, you have to decide the cases that the court takes. And they may not be something that you individually want to have to decide in here, but you have to. So you just have to try to be fair and impartial. That's the idea.
Is it possible?
Well, I think it probably is. You have to do all the reading and try to follow the law as you understand it and be fair and impartial. Yes, I think you could do that. We have pretty good court.
The back.
Justice O'Connor, my name is Ben Dexter. I'm a third-year evening student here in New England. I also have the privilege of heading up our Federal Society chapter. Question for you. It seems every election season with the president we hear about what type of justices the president will appoint. But it seems to me we hear very little about the lower federal courts, the district courts, the Court of Appeals. And right now we have quite a few vacancies on these courts. What, if anything, do you think can be done to raise the dialogue up, to encourage people to contact their elected officials, to push for fill these vacancies? Because that is where the rubber meets the road in the federal system.
Yes, it is a concern, and we do have a fairly large number of federal judicial positions in the country that have to be filled, and the term of years goes for life, but people step down and retire, and you have to get in there and as a ruling successful party get people nominated for the positions, and we can do it. It just takes effort. But I think there hasn't been a lot of controversy in the last few years about the appointments to the district and appellate courts. I think it's gone rather smoothly, don't you? I haven't seen a lot of hoopla about it at all. You pay more attention when it's the U.S. Supreme Court, and probably some attention at the Court of Appeals level, but very little at the district court level.
We'll do one more question.
All right, you pick them.
Hi, Justice O'Connor. My name's Katerina, and I'm a 1L. You've accomplished so much in your life, and throughout your legal career and your legal education, who did you look to as a role model, and why?
And what's the question?
Who did you look to as a role model throughout your legal
I didn't have one. I didn't have a clue. I knew that I wanted to work at work worth doing. And I didn't know what that work was going to be. And I kind of followed along and you're affected by what opportunities emerge as you go along. And I was practicing law, and all of a sudden there was an opportunity to be in the legislature, in my legislative district. And I really hadn't thought about being in the legislature. That wasn't something that was on my to-do list. But the legislator in my district took a job in Washington, D.C. And I had a chance to be appointed to fill the vacancy with the promise that I would then run in the next election. So I took that, was appointed, and then did run for the office in the next election and managed to get elected. And then in due course, there was an opening in the state senate in my legislative district, and I decided to apply for that and got on the ballot and won that. And things just happened along the way. If you do a good job in a job that you have, your chances are much better of hanging on to that or having another opportunity in some other public office. And I was lucky, I think, in Arizona. I ended up serving in all three branches of the Arizona state government, which was interesting as could be. And I learned a lot in that way. So maybe you can get involved at some level in your own community and or state, because it is interesting to do. Thanks today for being here. I enjoyed talking to you.
Justice O'Connor, I think most of the people in this room agree that you filled that void as role model. Thank you so much.
Okay, now study hard and learn to write persuasively. My one piece of advice: it'll do you well in the future if you do. Okay, thanks.